Hi, this is my review of Goalsystem Delves Dungeon Skirmish Roleplay. Goalsystem Delves is a very unique game because it's actually two games in one. This is a role-playing game and it's also a competitive skirmish game. They are both unified by the same system, the goal system, and it's a system that is it's quite streamlined, but at the same time it has enough depth and meat to it so that you feel that there's a lot of room for strategy and tactics. Now let's talk about the quality of the book. I'm going to put a link in the description below so you can find where to get it as a PDF or as a physical book. So the book is actually quite nice. It's quite beautiful. It's hardcover. It's really high quality. It's going to last you a long time. I love it when you have these hardcover books and you open them like this and don't sound like or something. And so it's quite sturdy. And everything is well written and organized and explained. However, there will be some very minor typos, but they didn't present an obstacle to understanding the game. They are quite unnoticeable. And you also have a lot of cool illustrations. They have different styles. So for example, you have illustrations that look kind of like a comic book. And you also have some other illustrations that are more like old school. So it varies, and all the illustrations are quite thematic and appropriate for this game. And at the back of the book you have a lot of player aids and game master aids, so you can keep track of things. And you also have templates for spells, and you even have a full color map of a campaign setting that comes with the book. Now let's talk about the contents. First, you get a nice introduction to what this game is. As I was telling you, it's a role-playing game, but it can also be played as a competitive skirmish experience. And you can use any miniatures that you like. It works better with 15mm and 28mm miniatures. And you can also use measuring tape or play it on a grid or a square grid or even a hexagonal grid. It also works there. And you have a lot of tips on how to do that. So that's great. It's very flexible. It adapts to your style of gaming. Now let's talk about the goal system, which is like the main mechanic of the entire game. It's basically rolling 6-sided dice and trying to get 4 or above, and that counts as a goal. So in essence, it's a success counting system. And if you roll a 6, you get 2 goals or 2 successes. And all of the different tasks and attacks in the game are carried out with this system of rolls. You get unopposed rolls and opposed rolls depending if it's a combat situation or something related to a contest between characters. And you also have chance rolls and such. I will talk a bit more about this as how it applies to combat in a few minutes. You also have a little description or overview of how to of the type of races and character classes that you can create. Because with this book you can create any race that you like, any class that you want, and monsters as well. So for example, in the role-playing side of things, you will be able to create your ideal character class. And on the competitive skirmish side of things, you could create a very interesting warband of monsters and player character type of pieces, so to speak, to participate in that battle. Now let's talk about how the goal system applies in combat and in other situations. Well, when it comes to navigating the dungeon, this system of rolls can be used to unlock doors and or maybe even break things and force doors open. You can also disarm traps. You can also make some very risky jumps across chasms and pits. So everything that has to do with moving around a dungeon or a particular nasty area, maybe some swamp or a very dangerous forest, you have all the information to do that here. And when it comes to combat, combat is divided in rounds, and these rounds are subdivided in turns. You make your initiative roll, and each participant takes his action according to that roll, but you also have the option to hold your turn, as in maybe you're not sure if that enemy is going to attack the caster in the group, so you want to hold your turn to see how that enemy acts so that you can react accordingly. Each turn you can move, perform a number of free actions depending on your class trait, and you can fight, of course, and you can do special actions such as activate a switch or pull a lever, pick an object, pick up an object such as those are the kinds of actions that you carry out. And then when it comes to movement, you basically have the option to charge at your enemy, but there are zones of control, so you won't be able to just move like crazy around the battlefield. There will be consequences if you get too close to an enemy. That enemy will get an attack of opportunity. And something that I really like is the system of cover. That is, you can move from cover to cover. Maybe there's a section in a dungeon or any other type of battleground where there are barrels and crates and such, and you will be able to move behind such objects. And if your opponent fails his roll to notice you, that opponent will not be able to attack you in ranged attacks or charge at you, so that's quite nice. It adds a bit of more depth to tactical advancement. Now when it comes to attack, it's basically an opposed roll, but you also have different options, more possibilities on how you carry out that attack. So for example, you may try to knock back or grab your opponent and toss him, especially if you're controlling like a troll or a giant. You could grab your enemy, maybe a halfling, and toss him around. You even have like a diagram to see where an object that you tossed ends at if you missed. And you also have the option to trip your opponent. And there are many ways in which you can apply penalties to your opponent. Maybe some things will result in immobilization or stunning your opponent. It depends on your special abilities and the use of spells. Now let's talk about hit points. You have a limited number of hit points, and when they reach 0, that is if you get hurt a lot, your character is knocked out and you have to make a roll versus death or you will die. If you manage to survive somehow, you will get a wound. And with every time, with each couple of wounds that you get penalties to your performance, so that adds a little bit of grittiness to the system. You will feel like you are slowly dying if you don't play good enough. So you have to consider how the many wounds that you will accumulate, and you have to play it safe sometimes. You also have rules concerning burning and drowning and falling, and getting damaged by the different hazards and traps in the environment. And as I was telling you, there are many more options when it comes to combat maneuvers, such as aimed shot, bypassing the enemy shield, disarming your opponent, driving back your opponent, etc. Something that could be crucial especially in the survival of your character is the use of fate points. Because fate will allow you to cheat within the system legally, so it's a bit of a contradiction. And basically, you spend a number of fate points to accomplish things such as automatically passing a check, or maybe re-rolling your entire dice pool. You could also gain a second attack, and that's very nice because movement in this game is handled somewhat more as jumping in and out of combat. So for example, you could use your character to move next to an enemy, attack that enemy, and maybe you kill that enemy and you move towards another enemy. You could spend a fate point to attack this next enemy, so that's a bit more depth as well. And if you have like a character who specializes in tumbling maneuvers, You could go around the battlefield hurting different enemies and such, but fate points are somewhat difficult to recover or regain, so you should spend them wisely. Now let's talk about character creation. In character creation, you choose a race, a class, you get your equipment, and you apply some finishing touches. As I was telling you, you have a great system to create your race and your class. However, I think it's a bit unclear when it comes to the hit points. Well, with a bit of common sense, you can follow the examples of the classes included in this game, but I wish they would have included like a hard rule concerning hit points when it comes to character classes. And when it comes to races, you get 12 races. Some of them are pretty standard. You have dwarves, elves, humans, but some of them are more monstrous, so you can have a gnoll character or a lizardman character, an orc character. Something that I thought was a bit funny when it comes to the gnoll is that the gnoll has priest as its favorite class. So for example, you could basically have a gnoll paladin, which would be a bit funny because the gnoll has low morale and is also a pack fighter that is usually attacks in groups. So you have a paladin who is somewhat cowardly and who needs to pile in and gang up on an opponent, so it's a bit funny. And then when it comes to the character classes, you have options within those classes. So for example, you have the druid. Let me show you an image of a half-orc druid. And the druid has the atavistic druid option, which is basically a shape-shifting druid, or the keeper druid, who is a druid with an animal companion. You also have the fighter. The fighter has man-at-arms, which is basically a defensive type of fighter, and you have the spearman, who is a bit more on the offense side of things and with a ranged attack potential. You also have the wild slayer, who is sort of like a gambler because you have to get into the middle of things in melee and try to deal as much damage as possible, but it could be a bit risky. And you have the fighting monk, who is a great hit and run character in my opinion. You have counter strike and a mighty blow and such, but you wear no armor, so that could be a risk as well. Now you have the mage, and the mage has the option of becoming a bard, and the bard is quite decent in close combat, and you also have magical abilities. And you have the wizard, who is not very good fighting up close, but at a distance you unleash very powerful spells. You also have the priest. The priest can be a cleric, that is a healer and a slayer of undead. And you can also be a paladin who inspires allies and is very good at close combat. You can also be a ranger. And the ranger can be an archer, that is a ranged attack specialist, or a bladesman who specializes in dealing damage through dual weapon mastery. Both of these options are very good at using cover, so you have the perfect skirmisher right here. You also have the thief. You can see a goblin there. Now, something that I thought was probably an error is on the goblin race. It has priest as a favorite class, so that seems a bit contradictory. Well, there aren't many goblin priests in popular fantasy. I think they meant thief, possibly. And when it comes to thief, you have the option of becoming an acrobat, that is navigating the dungeon environment quite easily, and the assassin, so you need this character to kill that enemy that is tearing your group apart, because you have abilities such as poison, dirty strike, assassin's mark, and such. All of these classes have tables indicating what things, bonuses and new abilities they gain as they level up. And I think they mix pretty well with the races, because the races also have such as like traits and abilities that enhance a particular character class. That's why you have favorite classes marked on the races section, because you also get a bonus, a +1 die to your dice pool when it comes to the class trait. However, if you decide to go outside the norm, maybe you want an elf fighter, you get a fate point as a bonus, so it could be fun to play as an unorthodox character, so to speak. Well, now when it comes to equipment, you have a nice selection of armor and weapons. And when it comes to the finishing touches, it's just recording everything in your character sheet. Now, I really like the character sheets in this game because they are quite somewhat small, so they feel more like character cards, and that's very good. It reduces bookkeeping quite a bit, and it makes everything easier to handle. So this is one of those role-playing games where a single player could handle 2 or 3 characters with no trouble at all. So if you have like a small group, this is definitely a good game for that. So you have like a party of 6 adventurers with each player controlling 2 adventurers. And you also have a system of alignment which is quite simple when compared to other more classic fantasy role-playing games, because here you only have good, neutral, and evil. You also have a grimoire, a selection of magic spells. Most of them are tributes to classic spells. So for example, you have Alf's Acid Missile, which is obviously I think it was Acid Arrow, right? Melf's Acid Arrow. And you also have Arcane Missile, obviously Magic Missile. And you also have, let me see, Henson's Hovering Hexagon, which reminds me of Tensor's Flying Disc, I believe. So you have a lot of spells for wizards and priests. You also have powers such as Altered Beast, Arcane Student, Bodyguard, Bow Mastery, Killing Hands. All of these powers are used when you decide to create your own character class, and they are included in the existing character classes. You also have creature powers that are more related with racial abilities, such as Adaptable, Breath Weapon, Brain Suck, Dark Vision, Deadly, Extra Attack. But you could also use them when you create your character class. It just requires a bit of imagination and common sense. Now you also have a good selection of monsters. A lot of them are just like reskinnings of classic monsters. So for example, you have the Oni Mage right here, which is basically the Ogre Mage. And you also have the Ovoid Eye Beast, which is kind of like the Beholder in Dungeons and Dragons. And you also have the Ganglion Mind Hunter, which is like the Mind Flayer. So most of these monsters will remind you of those classic monsters, and you have all the information that you need to create your own monsters. And it's pretty nice that they include these monsters, and you also have some pre-generated characters, because for example, maybe you want to play a quick skirmish game. You could just pick the monsters and the characters that you like for that particular session. And you have a section detailing how to create adventures and campaigns and run those adventures. Everything related to encounters and rewards and challenges. You also have a couple of full adventures. These adventures are quite heavy in combat, and it makes sense because this is a skirmish system, but there are role-playing opportunities in them, especially at the end. Because at the end of each adventure, you get the recovery phase. And during this phase, you can carry out many different things. So for example, maybe you want to go on an excursion before returning to town or to the city. And during this excursion, you could get bonuses. For example, maybe you want to gain more money when you sell the stuff that you found inside the dungeon. You could visit the Crime Lord's River Barge, or maybe one of your party members ended up with a curse. You could visit the Hag's Hovels to get a bonus to lift that curse, or maybe one of your characters died and you could go to the Shrine of Healing to see if you can get a bonus to resurrect that character. But each of these excursions also carries a risk. You could get a random encounter that's quite dangerous and could end up killing the entire party. But you could also get a treasure boon, so it could be worth the risk. You get all details when it comes to experience and treasure. Treasure is actually a very abstract system. That is the way they handle. You won't be counting each gold piece that you find. And you can also apply the system of experience and treasure gaining and selling treasure as a campaign system for the skirmish game. So if you want to have like a long skirmish campaign, you have all the information here on how to handle that, because maybe your characters are fighting in some sort of magic dungeon where when you die, you somehow revive in the next encounter, and your character will be able to become stronger as he gains experience points. Or maybe your characters just get knocked out and captured and they still gain experience points. It's up to you. You can play it however you like. And you have all the more information. So for example, maybe you just don't want to sell a treasure, you also want to visit the library and see if you research something interesting. Or maybe you want to carry out some mercenary work and gain a bit more extra cash. Or maybe you want to lift a curse, as I was telling you. There are many things, and all of these mini encounters or scenes could serve as opportunities to flesh out your character and roleplay and define what type of person or monster that character is. Now, when it comes to magic items, you also have a nice selection of magic items. Some of them, again, represent tribute of classic magical items. And you also have information how to create your own items and artifacts. And the dangers that come with powerful artifacts, because maybe you have this legendary powerful sword or shield or helmet, but it comes with a curse, or maybe there's some sort of group or sect that are after that magical artifact, and they could start chasing down your character. You also have a section about how to run a game that is a Dungeon Master's Guide, telling you how to craft adventures, how to balance encounters, set up traps. You have a nice selection of traps and hazards and information on how to create exotic environments, how to add artifacts to your adventures, how to introduce roleplay traits, which are basically ways in which you can specialize your character in a particular area. Maybe your character is very good at intimidation, or is a merchant, or maybe your character is charming. Some of the character classes will get bonus when with these traits, but you can create the character that you like. You also have more specific options. Maybe your character is a herbalist, or a lore master, or a diabolist, or a scholar. There's a lot of things here to create a unique character. And you also have a campaign setting that I will show you the map of the world of Onyx. And this is a solid campaign setting. It feels pretty standard when it comes to fantasy, but it's very well fleshed out considering the small section that it is contained in. So it serves like a really great place to start fleshing out your game world. You have information on gods and different regions, their enemies, their exports and such. So it's a very nice addition. And you have an appendix detailing how to create retainers. As your character becomes stronger, you will be able to recruit these non-player characters that could be magical retainers or martial retainers. So you can fill that spot in the party that you feel that is a bit lacking. And they also tell you how to handle death, both in characters and non-player characters. You also have a nice rules summary and all the information that you need to run the game at the end of the book. Now let me tell you what I think of Goalsystem Delves. I only have a couple of criticisms. The first one is quite minor, and it's the on the role-playing side of things. Maybe there's a player who is more like a war gamer and wants to get into role-playing games. He could find that maybe he won't be able to understand as well how the pacing of a role-playing game session. So the inclusion of a sample scenario of how to run a role-playing game could have been nice. You know, the typical Jimmy is running an adventure for Jack, Jill, and Tom. Oh, you enter the crypt of who knows what. What are you going to do? And all of that. That could be a nice addition. Well, also a very minor thing as well is that some of the rules could be open to interpretation, but with a bit of common sense, that's no problem at all. And the other criticism is that on the skirmish side of things, it also feels like there's not too much information to introduce a player, let's say someone who has played only role-playing games and wants to get into the competitive skirmish side of things, he could have a bit of trouble understanding how to build scenarios for that. So for example, you don't have tips telling you, oh, you could create a scenario where the objective is to sit at the throne room in the middle of the battlefield, and if you spend 3 consecutive turns sitting there, you will win the game, or this is an escort mission, or this is a hold your ground mission. So those objectives could have been nice, because for an experienced wargamer, he won't need that. He will figure out things on his own. But for someone who's a bit unexperienced, he could have a bit of trouble. And there's also not too much of an incentive to go at your opponent, to cross the battlefield and face him, because basically you could have your warband camping or turtling at a specific area of the map with no incentive to go and meet your opponent at the middle of the battlefield. But if you put, let's say you put a couple of rooms at the center of the battlefield that contain magical items that will give you an edge to defeat your opponent, then it's going to be a race trying to get to the middle, and they will face off right there and then. And I also recommend that if you do that, that you put some different alternate routes with traps and locked doors and perhaps some boulders blocking the way, so that you decide how you're going to get to that treasure room. Maybe you have a team consisting of burly characters, and maybe you want to use them to move the boulders aside, or maybe you want to cross the trap filled corridor, even though it's going to damage you. But maybe your skirmish warband is composed more of assassins and thieves, and probably you will say, oh, I'm going to try to climb over that wall and activate that switch to deactivate the traps and such. So some of those additions in the forms of advice or maybe some random tables could have been nice to enhance their skirmish side of things. But that is not to say that the skirmish side of things is incomplete. You have all the information and tools to build a proper skirmish scenario. But now let's talk about the positive things. This game is great. You have 2 games in one. You have a simple system with enough depth to it so that you feel like there are many choices. You have a system to create characters and monsters. And the fact that this book is small and quite simple, you could take this book, a handful of dice and measuring tape, and you could go anywhere that you like. And maybe you want to introduce a friend of yours to role-playing games or skirmish games, and you can go to your house and carry this with no trouble at all. And because you have the option of playing this as a sort of like a measuring tape system or as a grid system, you can create a battlefield almost out of anything. Maybe you want to turn the kitchen table into a battlefield, you can do that. So it's a very complete and portable game in that respect. And if you are someone who enjoys role-playing games, specifically those that like the classic fantasy side of things and old school side of things, you should get this one. And if you like skirmish games in which you feel that there is a bit more a variety of options, because if you do all the things that I told you, that putting traps and locked doors, it's not going to feel like you're just fighting against your opponent. It's going to feel like you are adventuring against your opponent, that is navigating a dungeon and trying to find treasure and defeating your opponent. So that's quite nice. And if you like both role-playing games and tabletop skirmish games, you should definitely get this one. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.